right, so you hear a term, intersectionality. What does it mean?
Yeah, these are terms that are being used by Marxists to penetrate the culture with their ideology. Intersectionality, let's back up just a little bit and talk about Karl Marx briefly. You know, Karl Marx, the German, madman, he in the Communist Manifesto and elsewhere, of course, Marx divided society. He divided it horizontally between the haves and the have-nots, between the proletarians and the bourgeoisie, the oppressors and the oppressed. That's the way he divided society. He saw everything in economic terms. The problem with that, in preaching his revolution, he was preaching it. He was exiled from Germany and ended up in Britain, and he was preaching revolution there. And then, later Marxists, endeavored, the founders of the Communist Party in the United States were also preaching revolution, and they were following this model of haves versus have-nots. The proletarians, workers of the world, unite and overthrow, your overlords. That message, while it had some success in countries that were essentially third world countries, parts of Africa, South America, Asia, Russia, it wasn't resonating in places like Britain. It wasn't resonating in the United States. And why is that? Well, Jay Lovestone, who was the, he sounds like a character from the Flintstones, but Jay Lovestone's an actual figure, and he was head of the Communist Party in America in the 1930s. And in a meeting, he went to Russia, and in a meeting with Stalin said, "Why are the workers not rising up?" And he said, which Stalin did not like, he said, "It's because workers in the United States aren't interested in our message of revolution because they can move up. There's opportunity for them to move up the economic ladder. So when we say you're oppressed, their response is to say, but, I'm putting my kids through college, and I have a 401k, and, I go to the beach on the weekends, and, this kind of thing, that in other words, that life isn't so bad. And there's even more opportunity for my children and for the next generation. You can get ahead in the United States, in other words, is what Lovestone was saying, because it might be somewhat stratified in terms of economics, but it isn't in terms of classes, because the taxi driver thinks he's every bit as good as, whoever's living in the Waldorf Astoria. That's America. Very different. So Antonio Gramsci, who was an Italian, communist, Gramsci decided that what Marx was missing was that rather than dividing society horizontally, it needed to be divided vertically and horizontally. In other words, the message of revolution in the West wasn't gaining any traction for the reasons that we've just outlined. However, we can turn them against each other in another way. So we need to stop speaking just in terms of oppressors and oppressed in economic terms. Let's talk about it in racial terms. Let's talk about it in sexual terms. Let's talk about it in these ways, because Marxism is necessary to turn people against one another. So you see me as an oppressor because I'm a male. Yet a black female may see you as an oppressor because you are a white female. A lesbian might see the black female as an oppressor because she's a heterosexual, and so on. So we just keep, I think, I would call it atomization. If I were to name it, instead of intersectionality, I would call it atomization, because what it does is it's atomizing society into ever smaller groups of oppressors and oppressed. That's the way they see it. And it's why you're hearing, because Marxists are discovering we weren't making any traction with the economic model, but we are having so much success turning Americans against each other by using the victimization model that is sexual, that is, in terms of races, these kinds of things. This is resonating with Americans. And so the idea of Marxism isn't to bring about unification. Joe Biden, for instance, ran on this idea that he was a unifier. Who believes that? Who actually believes that? The whole model of the Democratic Party is to divide people. So the idea, the way of doing that is if we can create suspicion between us, because I'm a male and you're a female, and I obviously have some motive of oppressing you, and you must have some motive to oppress heterosexual, homosexual females or immigrants or something like that. So, at the top of the pyramid is the white male. The rich white male is definitely, at the top of this pyramid. At the bottom are those people who are opt-outs on heterosexuality, on, let's say, American citizenship, on all of these things. They're not in the mainstream, and therefore they're the most oppressed, which means we have to have a transference of power from here all the way to down here. That means things like restitution for slavery, for example. It means that we need to start putting transgender people in positions of government. Is Joe Biden doing that? Yes, transferring huge amounts of power to people like this, opening our borders. We need to come up with terms like white supremacy and white privilege. These are all parts of intersectionality, and they're all Marxist ideas. And this is why, by the way, why I say when Christians are using these kinds of terms, they're speaking in terms of social justice, and they're speaking in terms of intersectionality. Tim Keller, using these terms as supposedly being, he says, useful tools. They are not useful tools. They are demonic tools that run contrary to a Christian, to a scriptural model.
Why do you think people are unaware of the impact of the language that they're using? And do you think at some point people say this, just describing it sounds ridiculous? Yeah.
I think, Amy Beth, the reason is because often the language sounds Christian. Because we don't speak of it the way that I just spoke of it, which is in raw, bare-knuckle terms. We speak of it or rather these people will speak of it in terms of justice, social justice. It's equality. That's what it's about. And I think that has a way of disarming the average Christian who doesn't know any better, where they go, well, I'm not against equality, am I? No, I'm not against equality. You see, when the pro-gay marriage lobby, when they were doing their surveys, 20 years ago, of the American people, they discovered that the American people were overwhelmingly against gay marriage. But then they changed the question. When they asked the question, are you in favor of gay marriage? No. But then when they said, are you in favor of privacy, they couched the question in terms of privacy. The average American then began answering the question very differently, and they knew that they had them when they put it in that kind of language. So when I say to you, are you in favor of Marxism, which is what it is, you of course will say, well, no, it leaves nothing but a trail of body bags. But when I say, are you in favor of equality? You answer a little bit differently. And Marxism never brings about equality. Never.
So what can we do about it?
Well, I think that people need to become much more educated about what it is that we're actually dealing with, what this issue is. And that means learning the language of this. Social justice, for instance, social justice warriors there's nothing Christian about that. Christians are interested in sharing God's message of redemption, his message of hope, of his grace, of eternal life. Social justice warriors see themselves as instruments of retribution, of agents of retribution. And that's a very, very different thing.
Thanks, Larry.
Yep. Thank you.